Hi there, welcome back to another Touchdesigner tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at creating a simple 2D to 3D logo and sort of spinning that. And I imagine the most common use case for this tutorial will obviously be for DJs or musicians who might have a illustrated logo or just have their name that they want to transform into a 3D audio reactive visual. And it's a very simple job, so I thought I'd do a quick tutorial on it. For my subscribers, appreciate you guys. Please let me know if these kind of tutorials are useful for you, or if you were looking for something a bit more complicated. This will be using very similar and basic techniques that we've gone over in Touchdesigner before, and obviously we're aimed at users who aren't as familiar with this software. But your feedback and ideas in the comment section below will help guide me to create the best channel for you guys. Additionally, before I dive in, it's worth noting that this project file as is completely available to download in its entirety on my Patreon. It's just a few bucks a month, and you get access to this file as well as every other complicated, more complex file that I create and post there. And you can simply plug in your image at the start here, or your name. But otherwise, we're going to keep this network up here for reference, and we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to build all the effects, including this chrome look, this simple audio reactive network, and this texturing bloom option as well. So the first thing we need to do is convert our 2D object or text to 3D. Now it's actually relatively simple to do that in Touchdesigner, and is a very underutilized part, especially for DJs. So you either want to drag and drop your image in if you already have an image. If you don't, then you can just get a text, and we're going to set the resolution to be something a little bit higher. You can pick a 16:9 ratio if you like, but I'm going to do a square ratio. I'm going to leave the text as derivative, but you can change that here if you want. Scale up the font. That looks about good. You can also now pick your fonts from here, or you can click plus here and select your own font file if you want to do something custom. Now the next step is to convert this to a 3D object, but it's worth noting that if your logo has a background or there's a specific thing that you would like to cut out, then you will want to play with the threshold or the edge options, which will create a threshold which will get rid of parts of the image beneath or below or above a certain threshold, or with an edge here you can see how it just highlights the edges of the word like so. I'm going to keep both of these available here, and we can maybe play around with them later. To convert this to a 3D object, we want to do a thing right clicking here and going to SOP, and you'll see the only option we have available for our 3D nodes is the trace, which sort of does as expect and traces the visual input that we pass in and a 3D space, and we end up with this currently 2D, but no worries, we'll push on, we will fix that object. You can also toggle this remove borders option, may be useful to you if you have a surrounding border. Otherwise you can have an additional threshold buffer here that you can play with if you need. So to actually add some depth to this, we want to connect this to an extrude node. You can see that we've got some freaky beaky business going on here, and the way we want to sort of adjust that is by going into the depth scale here and dragging this one right down. And I have multiple 3D displacements going on here. I'm just going to remove these nodes and then reconnect in the text, which is just going to remove any of that extra business that was going on. And now you can see I've scaled down the depth quite a bit. I've just picked this number by scrolling, and now we have a 3D text object, which is awesome. Yeah, I think that's all that's sort of worth noting. I hope if you guys are struggling with your specific image to 3D, then please contact me. It shouldn't be too hard, but definitely play around with the threshold and the edge, maybe a composite if you need to as well. And if you're not super familiar with any of those nodes, if you're quite new to Touchdesigner, highly recommend watching a few intro tutorials first. I have someone on my channel as well. But next we want to render this one out. So we may want to add in noise later, but we'll come back to that when we make some audio reactive stuff. So we render it by right-clicking, going to our comp and getting a geometry. To accompany our geometry, we want to also get a camera so we can see our object, a light so we can add some basic lighting, like so. We're also going to add an environmental light, and we will come back to this. This is to help get the chrome texture. We want to add a material under the material tab, and we're going to do a PBR in this case, which just allows us to have very quick access to a lot of these adjustments like so, which is very great, very good for a quick texturing job. And we can drag and drop the material on like so, and then we want to get a render. I have two networks going in here, like two networks going on, so you don't need to clarify it like I'm doing right now, but yours should just work like so. I'm simply specifying all my specific lights like that. Awesome. And then you can see our derivative's quite small. So firstly, under the common tab on the render, I'm going to set my resolution to be square. And then on the camera, we have translate options. You can type in a smaller number to bring it closer. Additionally, if you hold down middle mouse and hover over one of these options like the point scale and then go to the left, you can see we can zoom in like that. I'm then going to connect this to a null as it's good practice. Click this blue button to set it as my background, and then insert a RGB key, which will replace all the transparent with a black background. Cool. So now we need to see our little derivative. That's because we have a black on black texturing right now. So let's go ahead and firstly make this PBR a little bit more reflective. And so everything is turned up to 1 right now. So we just want to drag the roughness down like so. You can already see that it's adjusting a little bit here. And that's looking good. I might even bring the metallic down a little bit, but we can play with that and fine tune it later. Now the key to a good chrome texture is if you go and look at a mirror or any reflective object you see, it's actually a completely neutral / gray toned element, and its chrome style comes from just reflecting the environment around it. So all of that to say, we just need to define a environment that looks reflective, or like it looks gray or like studio or neutral, or however you want to say. So if we go to a movie file in like so, and we click plus here, we'll get our default Touchdesigner options. I'm going to grab this cloudy ocean like here. You should have all these same images that I had. And then if I apply this to the environment map, we can already see that we got our little, what do you call it? Sorry, our 3D object has appeared. However, it's a little bit, blue because it's sort of reflecting this blue environment. So you might want to connect this to a monochrome, maybe even add in a level between these two, and then, for example, might want to turn the brightness up like that, and now apply this final layer, and you can even connect it to a null. It's good practice. And drag and drop that on like so, and you can see we get a much more neutral sort of reflection there, and you can sort of play around with the different sort of environment there to get in more harsh lighting. You might want to also play around with the texture here, like so. So it's not actually affecting it too much, but that's okay. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that for now. We're not going to go too more advanced into texturing, although I do want to do a tutorial on that at some point for really my own sakes. Awesome. We're at the 10-minute mark, so let's quickly keep going through. So some of the styles I added above was from this palette up the very top left. Under image filters, we can grab a bloom, drag and drop it in. I also did a feedback, neither of which are necessary, but we will play around with them anyway. So let's connect this render into our first notch here, and then connect this feedback in like so. Just gonna click the pulse button and drop that onto this line to replace it. Cool. In the feedback, all the default parameters are not something I typically keep. If you want to have a bit of a easier to control bloom, at least for sort of understanding what each of the parameters do, you might want to change it to 11-bit float. It will sort of make the bloom behave in a much more expected way, but not as natural, I should say. But that being said, we're gonna, in this case, turn down the ramp glow level, which is this predefined color ramp like here. We're then left with our bloom and our glow. You can see what happens when we turn all the bloom off. We get just the blue hue here, which we can change to a white hue. This blue is still here because I hadn't pressed play and we have feedback going on. I'm going to drag the bloom up, and you sort of just want to play around with this to your liking. Obviously threshold, if we turn that down, will illuminate less of it, which is something you might want as it like spins around. And then I'm happy with that for now. The feedback we can leave as is, but this will become a bit more obvious. It just creates a bit more of feedback. You can drag that down as well if you would like. The next thing we're going to do is add a bit of texture. So I'm going to add a noise. I'm then going to connect this one into the first input because we're going to create this sort of noise mask. I'm basically just going to drag the period down to around there for this one. Then after the feedback, I'm going to connect in a displace, like so. Set the extend to repeat. I then want to connect from this noise a slope. When connecting into the second input of a displace, a slope sort of gives us more control over the displacement. So if I connect this in and then disable the slope, you can see it is a lot more of a harsh displacement, whereas here it's a much more gradual displacement that we have a lot more finer control over. I'm going to set the displace weight for both directions to around 0.2, just a slightly smaller number like so, and then from here play with the slope, bring that down a little bit. If you don't like the letters pairing through, then you can change the output to just noise and overlay it like so. And then if you want a bit more of a finer texture, you can obviously bring that down or do the opposite and bring it up. It's really up to you. I'm going to create something a little bit different. Let's do that. Awesome. And then we sort of have our textured little logo. Now again, maybe you want to bring the bloom up a little bit. Maybe you want the slope to not be as strong. If you want a bit of a textured look, maybe you don't want that textured look at all. Really up to you. Maybe you even want to do the texturing first. Connect that in to the bloom like that, and then do it after like that, which is a very subtle change, but that's essentially in Touchdesigner, the ordering of how you do things. It sort of piles on top of each other, just like in any other software, but you know, play around with it, be creative. I'm not trying to create a specific look in this tutorial, more so just teach you some more the common style techniques that Touchdesigner is really useful for. Cool, let's add in our audio. So we want to get a audio chop. So we can go audio device in or audio file in. Today I'm going to use an audio file, which will input the default one. You can also drag and drop your files in like so. And if you want to use Spotify, check my channel. I have a tutorial. It's 5 minutes long, super easy. We can connect this to an audio device out to hear our music. I'm going to disable that. Then in our palette under tools, we also have an audio analysis. We can drag and drop that in like so and connect it. Then right click here and connect in the select to select the values. I'm going to click this plus button to interact with the UI and turn on the spectral density. And I'm just going to use the low and the spectral density. If you want to use any of these other options, feel free, but this is what I'm choosing to use just today. So what I'm going to do is connect this to a speed. this will create a ever increasing value, which increases at the rate of what this value is. So the FMSD, which is basically tracking how fast or intense a song is going to increase in value to around 1 to 1.5 as a max value as its most in peak intensity. So the way I want to translate that into movement is I want the logo to spin faster the more intense the song is. So essentially I just want to use this value, which is ever increasing, so I can rotate the axes to control the rotation. So I can do that by grabbing the FMSD by clicking plus, hovering over geo, and then dropping it on rotate the letter, and then clicking reference, which will apply it to all three. You can see now it is rotating, but very, very slowly. That's because you can see this number is increasing at a slower rate, and a full rotation is obviously 360. So we just want to make this a little bit faster. So we can times this value by 30, which will obviously rotate it a lot faster. You could also rotate the next value by a different number to maybe create a little bit of a offset movement, and then even the third one by even faster, more intense value. Obviously, if you just want to rotate one axis, you can turn the other two back to constants, and it will just rotate on the one or two axes. It's really up to you. You can see that it's also the displacement is coming in, so you might want to zoom in a little bit on the displacement, on the offset, sorry. You could also bring the camera out a little bit. It's really up to you how you choose to play this. So that's our first little bit of audio activity, and the next simple one is we're just going to apply the bloom to be controlled by the kick. I'm going to do a reverse sort of thing where I have the lights flash away every time there's a kick. So I'm essentially going to take the low value here and throw that onto the threshold, and you see now that it flashes in time with the music. So that is essentially this whole network, just done in a little bit of a faster way. One thing I left out was potentially between the trace and the extrude, adding in some noise, or even after the extrude. Again, the point of which you insert these nodes do matter. And you see this noise is very intense, and I can turn the amplitude right down. So actually, let's compare. Let's add the noise there, and then let's add noise before the extrude. And you can see here that it's applying this noise to a 2D pattern and then extruding that 2D pattern in a 3D context and creating a much more controlled, interesting movement, at least in my opinion. And then, for example, this amplitude value you could also assign to your low, or a completely different one like a high, if that is something you want. It's quite jarring, so I could maybe turn up the smooth value on the UI here. It's also quite intense, so maybe I want to multiply this by 0.5 to halve the intensity. But that is essentially the whole tutorial. And the point of this tutorial was to create something that's quite easy to do, but to sort of show you my thought process in formulating, putting this all together, and hopefully just be a good exercise for people that are new to Touchdesigner, but also, can get something out of it by creating a audio active name. So feel free to drop off from this point forward, but I'm just going to yap a little bit about some other ideas that you could maybe start to experiment with on this. So we went over the basics of how we can apply these values from the audio into values like the bloom, as well as the feedback and such like that. Obviously, there's a lot more nodes here, like the noise, for example, has its own translation that you could apply. Same with the displaced weight. You could even play around with doing a bit more experimental stuff. Say if we enable the high here and we throw that onto the displaced weight, you can experiment with, obviously that's very intense, but that's the point. You throw it on, you're like, oh, I like that, it's intense, let me slow it down. Oh yeah, that's cool, but I hate how it just fades away. Maybe what if I do the bloom into the displace and then throw the feedback after there, so that way the effect lasts a little bit longer. The sort of like playful way of interacting with the nodes and sort of just discovering and dragging and dropping random values is a really, really good hands-on approach and methodology to learning Touchdesigner, especially your own capacity and your own intrigue, because you'll sort of get to understand these operators from your own perspectives. Obviously, your learning type is really down to you. A lot more people are a lot more methodological than I am. I'm a bit more of a hands-on sort of play around, see what happens kind of learner. These operators that we used are by far, at least in my practice, the most common ones that I constantly return to in terms of post-processing and obviously rendering. I do like a lot of Chrome. But it's really easy to put together something like this. So I highly recommend that you experiment with all the different hundreds of nodes that Touchdesigner has to offer, whether it's pre-made palette options in here, or it's simply just right-clicking here and going, hey, what does this particle one do? And it's like, what the hell is that? Let me start to look at this, break it down, look at the options. Obviously, there's the wiki you can click on up here. Really useful, but it's a lot more, reading-based, which is not for everyone. You can hover over these inputs to sort of get an idea of what they do. You can maybe disable operators to get a bit more control over what's happening, and then sort of try to figure out from there what's happening. Maybe looking at the network and going, oh, hey, that's being rendered here, but it's not very bright. What happens if I turn up the brightness or bring down the roughness? And so on and so on. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. I would love to get some feedback for this one. It's not even sure if I'm going to post it, but obviously if you're watching this, I have. It's a little bit of a turning point potentially in this channel, where I want to know if these beginner tutorials are still useful exercises for people that are learning Touchdesigner, or if people are looking to get more advanced, unique techniques. DM me, let me know, drop a comment. Appreciate you watching, and I'm going to leave today's video at that. Peace.